Welcome to Lesson 1.2, Applying Security Governance Concepts, Part 1. In your Candidate Information Bulletin, we are in the Security and Risk Management domain and in key area of knowledge B, which is Apply Security Governance Principles. Our topics will include governance principles, the legal requirements of due care and due diligence, and the importance of strategic alignment. The IT Governance Institute defines governance as a set of responsibilities and practices exercised by those responsible for an organization with the express goal of providing strategic direction, ensuring that organizational mission and business objectives are achieved, and ascertaining that risks are managed appropriately. I like to think about governance as leadership. The leadership of an organization is responsible for governance. As applied to information security, governance is the responsibility of leadership to determine and articulate the organization's desired state of security. A little bit later on in Lesson 1, we're going to be talking about risk tolerance and what the security objectives are for an organization. And it's really leadership who's going to determine and need to articulate and support the desired state of security. It's also up to leadership to provide the strategic direction, the resources, the funding, and the support to ensure that the desired state of security is achieved and sustained. We can't just say we want XYZ level of security. There has to be an investment made, an investment in time, in resources, in funding, and in visible support to achieve that desired state of security. Due care and due diligence are two fundamental concepts related to governance. Due care is a standard of care that a prudent person would have exercised under the same or similar conditions. These are actions that are taken by the organization to protect its stakeholders, its investors, its employees, and its customers from harm. And specifically related to information security, it's the decisions we're going to make about managing risk, about the controls that we're going to implement, and the resources that we are going to apply. Due diligence is defined as continued effort and activity. Means that we need to continually be reevaluating our decisions. As related to information security, due diligence is the act of investigating and understanding the threats and the risks that a company faces. So due care, how we act, due diligence, our continued effort and activity. Those two concepts are going to permeate through all of our information security work. So let's talk a little bit about strategic alignment. It's time to bury the myth that security is an IT issue. While IT personnel are extraordinarily important to maintaining a secure environment, they are not the decision makers, nor should they be the decision makers. Every information security decision must be informed by organizational goals and be in alignment with strategic objectives. That means that we're not making these decisions independently about what control to put in place as security professionals. It means that we need to understand what the organization is trying to achieve, what their long-term objectives are, and then what we need to put in place has to be in support of those objectives or aligned with those objectives. When strategically aligned, security will function as a business enabler that adds value. So there are 8 generally accepted system security principles that I want to share with you that really relate to governance and due care and due diligence and strategic alignment. These 8 generally accepted principles were published in the NIST Special Publication 800-14, the Introduction to Computer Security, and it was based on the OECD guidelines for the security of information system. Now, the OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So let's look through these 8 and kind of relate back to what we've been talking about. First and foremost, that computer security supports the mission of the organization. Now, you'll notice they're using the terms computer security. These 8 generally accepted system security principles were actually written close to 20 years ago. And so at that point, we weren't really using the terms information security and certainly not the term cybersecurity. The term computer security was being used, and we're using these verbatim. But in your mind, you can substitute information security, cybersecurity. It'll work all the way through. The second is that security is an integral element of sound management. That means that security decisions need to be made by management, but also that security decisions need to be totally integrated into the decision-making process. The third is that security should be cost-effective. Doesn't mean that it has to be cheap. It just means that it has to be effective in relation to what we're trying to protect. We should never be spending more to protect something than the value of what it is we're protecting. The fourth is that system owners have security responsibilities outside their own organizations. That relates directly back to our conversation about cybersecurity. That in cybersecurity, we have to be looking outside our own organizations. We have to collaborate with other organizations. We have to recognize that what we do has an impact on other organizations, and we need to share information. Number 5 is that security responsibilities and accountability should be made explicit. We should not assume that people inherently know what to do. So the security responsibilities for decision-making, for risk management, for implementation should all be very clear, very explicit, from job descriptions all the way through down. And accountability should also be made explicit so that we know who does what, hopefully because we can reward them, sometimes because we want to reward them, other times because we may need to deal with a specific issue. Number 6 is that security requires a comprehensive and integrated approach. Security should not and cannot be siloed if it's going to be affected. So for example, if we're going to purchase a new application, perhaps for our marketing department, we need to be thinking about the security requirements right in the early stage. At the same time marketing is saying, I need a new program to do X, Y, Z, we should be talking about the security requirements. And all the way through, as we're acquiring it, as we're bringing it on, as we're thinking about disaster recovery or business continuity components for availability, that every step of the way, we should be thinking about security in line with the business objectives. Number 7 is that security should be periodically reassessed. This is our goal of assurance, that we are continually reassessing that our controls work, that what's changed in the threat environment, has our risk levels changed. So it's never a set and forget. This is always an iterative process. And lastly, understanding that security is sometimes constrained by societal factors. There's a lot of pressure on folks to get their job done. Sometimes they will not follow a procedure because they feel pressured to be more productive. Sometimes they'll feel like there's a stumbling block that we've put in their way for a security control. Other times there might be a rush to market. There may be economic factors. And as security professionals, we have to understand that these other pressures, these other factors exist. We need to acknowledge them, and we need to learn to work in concert with them. So we've been talking a lot about strategic alignment. Let's look at some components of strategic alignment. The true value of information security is protecting the entity from harm and contributing to organizational success. So our components of strategic alignment include, we need to be business enablers. Information security should be a business enabler first and foremost. The second component of strategic alignment is risk management. We need to understand what the risks are, and we need to make decisions about those risks, whether we're going to accept those risks, whether we're going to mitigate the risks, or whether we're going to change up the activity. And we'll be spending multiple lessons talking about risk management. We need to ensure that security is delivering value to the organization. We need to be using resources wisely. And we need to ensure that we're not impacting performance, that in many ways we are enhancing the performance of the organization. So to enable the business, to manage risks, to deliver value, to manage resources appropriately, and to have good cost-effective performance. Those are our key components of strategic alignment. But to strategically align your information security objectives with the organization, you really have to know a lot about the organization. And first you need to know about the organizational structure and the culture. So what do we need to know? Well, we need to know what the guiding principles and the mission are of the organization. We need to understand who the organization is and what they are looking to accomplish. That's the first thing that we have to understand if we're going to implement appropriate security measures. We need to know the governance model. We need to understand the governance model. We need to be aware of the organizational chart. We need to know who reports to who, how departments function, who makes decisions. We need to understand strategic plans. So while we need to know their mission overall, we need to know strategic plans for both the near term, the short term, and the long term, which includes, are there any mergers or acquisitions on the horizon? Are there any divestitures on the horizon? Do we have plans to allow more people to telecommute? Do we want to move into a more mobile environment? All of those are fundamental to creating information security strategies. understanding the communication channel, not just the decision-making communication channel that we can understand a little bit more from our organizational chart, but how do we communicate with the user community at large? How do we communicate with our vendors or our service providers, our third parties? When we need to do security awareness, how do we approach it? What are the best ways to communicate within the organization? And lastly, what is the culture? And the corporate culture is absolutely fundamental to understanding how we interact with the organization as a whole. The corporate culture is defined as a shared attitude, the values, the goals, and the practices that characterize a company, an organization, an agency, or institution. This is different than their mission. Their mission is what they're trying to accomplish as an organization. The corporate culture is really at the core, who are they? How do they act? How do they interact with each other? How do they interact with the community? And knowing the corporate culture is fundamental to understanding how you're going to interact as a security professional with the rest of the organization. So let's do a brief lesson review. We started with talking about governance principles and what governance is and the role of leadership. We're going to be talking in the next lesson about very specific roles within an organization. We talked about the legal requirements of due care and due diligence. We looked at the 8 generally accepted system security principles that are published in the NIST 800-14. Those are really instructive and can inform us as to how, as security professionals, we need to develop our information security programs and interact with an organization. We looked at the importance of strategic alignment. We looked at the influence of corporate culture. In our next lesson, we're going to be looking at sort of the governance ecosystem, the various roles and responsibilities. But before we go to the next lesson, let's do a match the meaning. The key terms that you must know from this lesson are governance, due care, due diligence, strategic alignment, and corporate culture. So just like in the last lesson, on the left-hand side, what you're seeing are these terms. On the right-hand side are a bunch of mixed up meanings. What I'd like you to do is put me on pause, match the meaning, then come on back, and we'll go through each of those. All right, let's try our lesson 1.2 terms. The first is governance. Governance sets strategic direction and provides leadership. Now that's a truncated definition, but that's really what you need to know about governance. It's really the strategic direction. It's the leadership of our organization. Due care is a standard of care. That's the way you want to think about it. Another way I think about due care is that all of us as information security professionals are stewards of the information and systems that we've been entrusted with. So to me, due care is really stewardship. And stewardship would be a standard of care, how we're protecting what has been entrusted to us. Due diligence is our continued effort and activity, recognizing that security is not a set and forget, that we have to be continually reassessing our security posture, the threats, the risks, our controls, everything. Strategic alignment is supporting the business objectives, and corporate culture is the shared attitude, vision, and goals. So governance, due care, due diligence, strategic alignment, and corporate culture. So we're going to end this lesson with looking at 3 CISSP exam tips. One is that governance is a foundation of an information security program. If leadership doesn't support the information security program, if leadership doesn't believe in the information security program, then the information security program will fail. The second one is an information security program must be strategically aligned with business objectives. The information security program exists to support business objectives, so we need to be aligned. And the third is that information security is not an IT function. IT has a very important role to play in information security, but it is not their domain. Thank you very much for joining me for lesson 1.2, and I look forward to seeing you in lesson 1.3.